Tonight, we slip quietly into a world where a single misplaced hemline could ruin a woman's reputation forever. You're standing in your bedroom in mid-19th century England. The fire in the hearth has burned out hours ago. The air is sharp with cold, and you already feel the weight of what awaits you. The corset, the layers of petticoats, the stockings, the gloves, the hat. But before any of that, there is one unspoken rule hanging over you like a velvet noose. No one must ever see your ankle. Not your neighbor. Not a passing coachman. Not even the wind is allowed a glimpse. It sounds absurd now, but in Victorian society, ankles were considered dangerously erotic. Yes, ankles. Not bare shoulders. Not cleavage. A simple curve of bone just above the shoe was enough to provoke scandal, fuel gossip, and call a woman's moral character into question. Before sunrise, you step into your stockings. They are pale, finely woven, and pulled high enough to disappear beneath bloomers and petticoats. You're careful not to tug them too tightly. If they wrinkle or sag, someone might notice. And if someone notices, someone will talk. Outside, the air carries the familiar scent of soot and tea. You take a breath and guide your foot gently into a heeled leather boot. 20 tiny buttons run down the side, so small you need a special hook to fasten them. This isn't just fashion, it's armor. Every layer between your skin and the world is protection from judgment. To Victorian eyes, a bare ankle was the equivalent of public indecency. You descend the stairs slowly. One misstep, one careless flick of fabric revealing an inch too much, and the housemaid might see. She might whisper it to the cook, who might mention it to the butcher, and by week's end your vicar could be delivering a sermon with your name quietly folded into it. And windy days. Windy days are the enemy. Gusts of wind are your mortal enemy. You know women who've sewn lead coins into the hems of their skirts just to weigh them down. Others wear ankle-length bloomers with lace-get decoys that simulate modesty even if their outer skirt betrays them. Once at a cousin's garden party, you saw it happen. A girl stepped onto the gravel path, tripped slightly, and the wind betrayed her. Just a glimpse, not even skin, just white stocking. But it was enough. You remember how the conversation paused? How 3 ants turned their heads like owls. The girl turned red, nearly wept, and spent the rest of the afternoon pretending to feel ill. She wasn't invited back. And here's the kicker. While your ankles must remain hidden, your elbows, for some reason, get a free pass. Evening dresses bare the shoulders and arms, but not the ankles. Apparently, Victorians had a very selective idea of what was seductive. So now every time you walk slowly, controlled. You never climb stairs if someone is behind you. You avoid dancing with overly enthusiastic partners. Even boarding a carriage becomes a tactical operation. Gather your skirts, check the wind, and ascend gracefully without flashing a millimeter of scandal. It's not just about dignity. It's about belonging. An exposed ankle doesn't just make you improper. It makes you different. And being different in Victorian England is one of the most dangerous things a woman can be. You grip your parasol a little tighter. It's not even sunny, but the parasol completes the illusion. Modest, composed, covered. You pass the baker's wife on the lane and offer a nod. Not too low, not too eager, and most importantly, not a single step of yours lifts the hem too far. Because in this world, modesty isn't virtue. It's survival. As you make your way to the dressmaker's shop, you catch a glimpse of a girl, probably no older than 16, rushing across the muddy lane with her skirts hitched up to avoid the puddles. It's only for a second, but you spot it. Her ankle fully visible, stocking, but unmistakable, and she's laughing. You freeze just slightly, not out of horror, but confusion. How is she not afraid? The older woman beside you, your aunt perhaps, or your chaperone for the morning, clicks her tongue disapprovingly. Girls these days, she mutters, barely above a whisper, but laced with enough judgment to wither an oak tree. You nod because you have to, but in your chest, something stirs. It isn't quite rebellion. It's not even curiosity. It's something smaller, quieter. Envy. You envy that girl's ankle. That one brief moment of ease. That ability to laugh while her skin defies society, even for a second. But you can't do that. You know better 'cause you've been raised with stories. Not fairy tales, but cautionary ones. You know of a distant cousin whose bare ankle led to whispered invitations, which led to scandal, which led to being shipped off to a rest home where no letters came back. You know, a neighbor girl whose engagement was broken off because a guest saw her lifting her skirts too quickly while stepping over a puddle. The groom's mother called it a sign of looseness. This is the world you live in. A world where ankles determine marriage prospects, and lace trim can rewrite your social ranking. But there's also something darker beneath the surface. You've heard the rumors, too. The ones whispered by housemaids after dark. That some men, respectable married men, request glimpses of a woman's ankle in private, that they pay for it, that some actresses and dancers are admired not for their talent, but for how daringly short their performance costumes are. It's all part of the same machine, public shame, private obsession. Your ankle must be invisible by day, yet men will fantasize about it behind velvet curtains at night. You're not supposed to know that, but of course you do. So you tighten the ribbon at your wrist. You lower your hem half an inch before entering the shop. You take each step as if you're performing, because in a way you are. Every moment is a test. Are you modest enough, graceful enough, silent enough? But most of all, are you covered enough? Inside the shop, a new fabric catches your eye. Striped pale blue and ivory. You think briefly how nice it would look as a summer dress. But then you wonder, will the hem fall low enough? What if you have to climb a garden step? What if the carriage hits a rut? Could someone see? You abandon the idea and choose the heavier will blend. It's less flattering, but it won't betray you. You can trust it not to ripple in the wind or lift when you sit. You can trust it to keep your secrets, to protect your ankles from the hungry eyes and sharpened tongues of Victorian society. By the end of the day, your legs ache, your boots pinch, your posture has been rigid for hours, and your entire body feels like it's been held in place by invisible strings. But your ankles, they remained hidden. And in this world, that means you did everything right. You sit on the edge of velvet chairs holding a porcelain plate in one gloved hand and a silver fork in the other. Afternoon tea is in full swing. Tiny sandwiches, miniature cakes, and fruit arranged like still life art. There's polite chatter, the occasional cough into a handkerchief, and the ever-present sound of china clinking against china. Across the table, a woman reaches delicately for a slice of pear. You follow suit, but your hand stops midair because on the same platter sits a perfectly ripe banana, and you absolutely cannot be the one to take it. You glance around subtly. Has anyone touched it? Is it simply decoration? But no, the host in a burst of enthusiasm insists. Oh, do try the fruit deer's bananas imported this week. You blink because while the banana is new to England, only widely available thanks to steamship trade with the West Indies, its shape, texture, and manner of consumption have already earned it a terrible reputation among Victorian women. You glance at your chaperone. She raises a single eyebrow. That's enough. You retreat to the safety of tea biscuit. Because here's the problem. Eating a banana requires intimacy. You have to peel it, hold it, take bites, chew, all while maintaining eye contact with the other guests. Not chance. Not when the banana has become a symbol of indecency. Unspoken, of course, but widely understood. It's not written in any official etiquette guide, but every woman knows bananas, peaches, and other fleshy, dripping fruits are best avoided in polite company. Some say the Queen herself once refused to allow peaches to be served with their skins on. Too messy, too suggestive. Others whisper that an actress was once booed off stage simply for biting into a peach during a scene. A peach. But the banana, it's in a class of scandal all its own. And it's not just about the act of eating. It's what it suggests. The shape, the softness, the slow, deliberate peeling. It doesn't matter if you're the most modest woman in the room. A single banana can undo years of careful reputation management. Even fruit salads become minefields. Some hostesses slice everything into cubes just to avoid any unfortunate interpretations. Others soak the fruit in wine, claiming it's for preservation, but everyone knows it's so no one will be tempted to lick the juice from their fingers. You sigh gently and reach for a dry cracker. Still, part of you wonders, what if you were alone, just once? Could you peel it slowly, boldly, even laugh while doing so? But this world is not built for those thoughts. You sip your tea and banish them. The woman beside you makes a fatal error. She picks up the banana with a gloved hand, peels it halfway, and takes the tiniest bite imaginable. She doesn't chew, just presses it between her teeth and swallows. The room quiets just slightly. It's enough. Someone coughs. A servant shifts in the hallway. Your chaperone stiffens. And though no one says a word, you know she will not be invited to the next tea. Later that evening, you're in the drawing room with your mother and two of her bridge companions, listening to them trade thinly veiled insults behind lace fans. The topic inevitably circles back to that woman from the tea. Did you see how she held it? One says, not even with a fork. No sense of boundaries. Another murmurs, dabbing her lips, though she hasn't taken a sip in minutes. Or shame. You nod, not because you agree, but because you're expected to. It's the price of silence, of safety. You've learned that in this world, even the texture of fruit can determine your moral worth. Bananas are not simply food. They are symbols, markers, tests. And failing that test, even once means risking exile from polite society. And don't think it's just bananas. Peaches, mangoes, even figs. Each has its own whispered associations. Some say that a well-bred woman should only eat fruit that can be cut into neat cubes and lifted with a fork. Never anything requiring licking, peeling, or biting with visible effort. The rules are not written, but they are memorized through social observation, like learning the steps of a dangerous dance. One girl, Margaret from Kensington, you think, was once seen biting into a nectarine on a garden bench. The juice ran down her wrist. She licked it instinctively. 1 week later, she was engaged to a widower twice her age and quietly removed from every luncheon list you'd ever seen her on. Coincidence? Perhaps. Or perhaps someone's mother noticed and intervened. Because it's not just about you. It's about your family, your sisters, your eligibility. Your entire household's respectability can be stained by the sight of a bite too bold. Your younger cousin once asked innocently, "What's wrong with bananas?" She was 8. Your aunt looked stricken and told her, "They're for breakfast only, and only at home." That was the end of that. The irony, of course, is that men are exempt. Your brother can eat 3 bananas in a sitting and get praise for his appetite. He can slurp oysters straight from the shell, lick plum juice off his fingers, even belch after supper, and still be considered a fine, marriageable gentleman. A bit rough perhaps, but charming. You must manage your mouth like a stage curtain. Anything that passes through it becomes a moral gesture. Each bite is choreography, each chew a performance in restraint. And so you practice in your room. You practice cutting a banana into slices before you eat it. You practice eating peaches with a spoon, carefully scraping the flesh from the pit so you don't have to suck. You practice tucking a napkin under your wrist before lifting fruit to your lips. All of it for the illusion of effortlessness, to look like a lady who never struggles, never hungers, never drips juice down her chin. Eventually, you stop choosing fruit at social functions altogether. Too risky, too symbolic. You learn to survive on dry cakes and conversation. And yet, in the privacy of your kitchen, long after the guests have gone, and your maid has been dismissed for the night, you take a banana from the pantry. You peel it slowly, luxuriously. You don't look over your shoulder. You don't flinch. You bite into it, and you laugh just once, just enough. And in that single moment, your mouth is entirely your own. You're in the garden, wearing your second best walking dress. Still heavy with layers, but at least it doesn't trail in the mud like the blue satin one. The sun is warm, the hedges are trimmed, and the scent of lavender wafts from the corner beds. A bird hops past you. You bend down ever so slightly to pick up a fallen glove, and your knees instinctively lower. Stop. You freeze. You can't. You mustn't squat. You immediately correct your posture, straightening your back, legs pressed neatly together, the motion stiff as a board. One glance around confirms it. No one saw. You exhale. Crisis averted. Because in the Victorian world you inhabit, how you position your body is a moral declaration. And squatting, crouching, or anything that spreads your legs, even slightly, is not just unladylike. It is indecent. There's a reason Victorian etiquette guides devote entire chapters to how a lady sits. A woman must always keep her knees together, ankles crossed, back straight, and whatever you do, don't touch the ground with both feet flat if your bottom is lowered. That's common. That's what the washerwoman does behind the yard gate. That's what children do when playing with sticks in the mud. That's what the help does. You are not the help. You're a lady. Or at least you're trying to be seen as one. And that means your body must stay vertical, narrow, and contained. No lounging, no flopping, and absolutely no squatting. Even in private, the rule lingers. You've seen girls chastised by their governesses for kneeling too low while retrieving a fallen book. One poor cousin tried to tie her shoe in the parlor, crouched like a cat, and was told to compose her limbs or risk vulgarity. The phrase haunts you. Compose your limbs as if your arms and legs are rebellious musicians threatening to break into jazz at any moment. In your family, there's a little bench by the entryway. Not for sitting. No, it's for resting one hand as you bend correctly to adjust your hem or fix your shoe. Always with dignity. Always with one leg extended backward, as if you're about to curtsy to the queen herself. Sometimes it takes longer to tie a bootlace than to walk a block. But speed is not the point. Elegance is containment, stillness. You watch a boy, probably 12, chase a hoop down the cobbled street. He squats easily to pick it up, then springs into motion, laughing, and you feel something strange stir in your chest. Not longing, not quite, but a quiet kind of grief for a body that moves without fear. Your body, by contrast, has become a set of rules wrapped in fabric, and posture is everything. A slouch hints at laziness. Legs apart hints at looseness. Resting your elbow on a table, only in the privacy of your own room, and only if you're writing poetry about melancholy. You remember a story once told at a sewing circle? A young woman bent down to feed a stray cat behind her house. A neighbor saw her squatting skirt, lifted slightly at the knees, and wrote an anonymous letter to her father. She was promptly forbidden from walking alone again. The cat presumably went hungry. The fear of your own knees becomes instinctive. You begin to move like clockwork, deliberate, upright, choreographed. Even when you're alone, your muscles remember the rules. You perch on chairs instead of sinking into them. You kneel on one side only, never both knees. You pick things up by bending at the waist like an awkward mechanical crane. Rather than letting your body lower naturally to the floor, it's not about comfort. It's about control. And there are layers beneath these layers, both fabric and expectation. Your dress restricts you, yes, but it's the corset that turns your spine into a rod and your ribcage into a cage. With your abdomen cinched and your breath shallow, it's physically painful to squat or fold. To do so might mean tearing a seam or worse, snapping a bone. One woman in Bath allegedly broke 2 ribs after sitting without poise on a low stone bench. Another fell ill after crouching to avoid the rain and exposing her under layers to the damp. Whether these tales are true or not hardly matters. They're retold like scripture, warnings to keep your limbs disciplined and your instincts buried. Even furniture conspires against you. The seats in Gentile households are made shallow on purpose with no room to lounge or sink in. Armchairs are narrow. Backrests are stiff. Rocking chairs associated with grandmothers and servants. Sofas are for sitting upright and sipping tea, not napping, sprawling, or heaven forbid tucking your feet underneath you. But it's not just posture, it's positioning. If you're seated and your legs accidentally spread, just slightly, you feel the heat rise in your chest. You know someone will notice. A matron, a governess, a stranger with a sharp eye. And even if they don't say anything, they will remember. Your reputation is made not in grand speeches, but in fleeting moments like this. And so you fold yourself up day after day into the narrowest version of yourself. Your spine aches, your legs throb, but you endure because sprawling is for men and clubs. Slouching is for drunkards in the street. And squatting is for animals. Still in the garden, there are moments, brief, unguarded, where instinct overtakes decorum, like when your dog drops his ball at your feet, or when a daisy blooms just outside the neat path, too small and too lovely to ignore. And sometimes you do it. You squat, not fully, not openly, but just enough to reach something on the ground, to feel your heels touch earth, to remember what freedom feels like. You don't stay there long, but the sensation lingers. Later that night in your room, you'll try it again. Not out of rebellion, but curiosity. You'll close the door, turn the key, and lower yourself slowly. Watching your knees bend, your skirt fan out around you. Your body assume a posture not permitted in parlor. You'll feel strange, exposed, powerful, and just before you rise again, you'll smile because for one short moment, you occupied space the way your body was meant to. It's dinner party at your cousin's house. White linen tablecloth, silver candlesticks, polished forks lined like soldiers. You sit at the long table between your aunt and a man you were hastily introduced to as Mr. Levington of Nottingham. His sideburns gleam with paid, and his waistcoat is too tight for comfort. But that isn't your concern tonight. Your concern is the chicken. More precisely, what to call its lower portion. Because as absurd as it sounds, you cannot say leg. Not in this house. Not in front of men. Not in front of anyone really. The word leg is too suggestive, too anatomical, too improper. You glance at the platter as the servant carves the bird and wonder, can you get away with just pointing? You remember the rule drilled into you by your finishing governess. A lady does not refer directly to limbs, under things, or anything that makes the listener imagine her body beneath the dress. That includes legs, pantaloons, corsets, busts, thighs, and yes, even the word trousers. Your safest bet tonight is to ask for a bit of the dark meat. That's the coded phrase. If you slip and say leg, it might cause no visible uproar, but you'll feel the tension ripple. A furrowed brow, a sideways glance. A teacup paused midair. It happened once to a girl you knew, Agatha. Bright, eager, just a bit too sincere. She was invited Sunday roast with a judge's family. When offered the choice of cuts, she'd said brightly, "Oh, I do prefer a leg." And that was it. The wife stiffened. The son choked on a cider. Agatha was never invited again. You were too young to understand why then. Now you know. The word painted a picture of her legs, possibly bare, possibly parted. And once that image enters a gentleman's mind, it cannot be erased. Which is why even now, as you sip your soup, your vocabulary is tightly laced just like your corset. You do not speak of legs. You do not acknowledge their existence, even in yourself. If you trip, you've lost balance. If your stockings tear, they are damaged below. If your petticoat rides up, you adjust your skirts. This code extends beyond speech. It bleeds into how you walk, how you sit, how you even think about your own body. Legs become abstractions, ghosts. You have them, of course, but you're never supposed to acknowledge them. Mr. Levington, beside you, says something about his hunting trip. Caught a buck by the hind leg, he says. You flinch, not because of the imagery, because he said the word aloud, boldly, without shame. Men can do that. They can say leg, thigh, pants, even drawers, and it's considered rugged, earthy, masculine. You ask for the lower portion, or simply say whatever you recommend. That's the game, and you play it well. But it wears on you. This constant substitution of language, this dance of euphemisms. It's like walking through life on tiptoe. Your own vocabulary a minefield of meaning. One wrong word, and you're not a lady anymore. You're an invitation. After dinner, you retreat to the parlor with the other women while the men linger behind, already lighting cigars and launching into politics. The ladies gather around the tea tray. Conversation turns to lace prices, then to someone's daughter's upcoming debut, and finally, as if pulled by magnetic force, to the evening's near miss. Did you hear her? Of course they did. She almost said it. One whispers, lips barely moving. She reached for the chicken and then caught herself. Smart girl, says another. Quick tongue, or rather quick to bite it. The group chuckles, is dainty and restrained. You join in, though your smile feels rehearsed because you did almost say it. You had felt the word forming behind your teeth, leg. You'd even tasted the L, but you swallowed it down just in time and offered instead. The part just above the wing. Safe, obscure, acceptable. This is what dinner parties are now. Not just socializing, but survival. A game of phrasing, a performance of vagueness. Even as you sit with other women, even in spaces without men, the rules still hold. You think of your maid, Anna. Earlier that week, she stubbed her toe and cried out, blasted leg before covering her mouth. You had to scold her gently, though part of you admired her freedom. She doesn't dine with judges. She doesn't attend charity luncheons. She can call her body what it is. You, on the other hand, are surrounded by women who refer to their legs as lower limbs and their underwear as unmentionables. Even the word corset is sometimes replaced with foundation garment, as if the object wrapped around your ribs, squeezing the very air from your lungs, is too intimate to name aloud. One widow in town once referred to her aching hip at a sewing circle, and the host changed the subject so swiftly you'd think she'd sworn. And yet, the absurdity hides something deeper, a fear of the body itself. The Victorian ideal isn't just modesty. It's denial. denial of pain, hunger, desire, even anatomy. Your very vocabulary is shaped to erase you, but not entirely. At night, in your room, with the curtains drawn and the lamp burning low, you take off your shoes, your stockings, your skirts. You sit quietly on the floor, stretch your legs out in front of you, and look at them. Not lower limbs, not the area below. Legs. You flex your feet. You feel the ache in your calves from standing all day. You run your hands down the muscles and whisper the word just once, just for yourself. Leg. It's such a simple thing. A word used 1,000 times a day by everyone else. Men, boys, maids, even animals have legs. But for you, it's a reclaimed thing. A quiet protest. You lie back on your rug, legs sprawled, untucked, unhidden, and let the silence hold you. Not proper, not poetic, just real. And somehow that feels far more dignified. It starts with a glance. A man passes you on the street. A stranger in a tall hat. Eyes as sharp as his collar starch. Your gaze lifts by accident. Just for a moment, you meet his eyes. And just like that, you made a statement. Not a hello, not a smile, not a word, just eye contact. But in the world you live in, that is enough. Because in Victorian society, a woman's gaze is not neutral. It's charged. Every flicker of eye contact is either a challenge, a flirtation, or a mistake. And the rules are clear. Respectable women look down. You lower your eyes immediately, cheeks flushing with a kind of shame, usually reserved for actual sins. But it's too late. He saw it. You know he did. And what he chooses to make of it, that's now out of your hands. This is the lesson drilled into you since girlhood. Modesty begins with the eyes. Do not stare. Do not linger. Do not invite. Look past men, not at them. A demure woman keeps her gaze soft sideways or safely lowered. Even if a man speaks directly to you, your eyes should flutter like wings, dipping politely, never locking in for too long. Long eye contact. That's what actresses do. Or worse, actresses who aren't on stage. You remember what happened at Mrs. Dunworthy's musical last spring? One of the guests, a merchant's daughter with bold eyebrows and a tendency to speak before thinking, laughed at something a young man said, and held his gaze a second too long, just a second. But it rippled through the room like spilled perfume. By the end of the night, someone whispered that she was forward. By the next week, loose. By the next month, she was no longer invited anywhere at all because a glance, just one, can be read like a page of scandal. And that's what makes it so maddening. Men may leer. They may wink. They may scan you like catalog items and suffer no consequence. But you must master the art of invisibility without blindness. You must see everything while pretending to see nothing. It's not easy. At church, you sit 2 pews behind a man who adjusts his collar every 5 minutes. You notice, of course, you do, but you do not look directly. Not even when he turns to glance at you. Your gaze remains on the book, the floor, the window, anywhere else. It becomes a skill like needlework or dancing. You learn to recognize someone's approach by the rhythm of their steps. You know a man's mood by the tilt of his hat. You hear the inflection of their interest in how they say your name, but you do not meet their eyes. Because your eyes are not your own. They are interpreted, filtered through the rules of the room, the assumptions of others, and the heavy fog of Victorian propriety. And worst of all, if something happens, if a man misreads your gaze, acts on it, or tells a story, the blame lands squarely on your shoulders. Because why were you looking at him like that? At home, even your mirror reminds you to behave. Your mother once told you that a lady should practice her expressions alone, just as she would her piano scales, not to become vain, heaven forbid, but to ensure her face betrays nothing. A raised eyebrow can imply sass. A parted mouth suggests longing. And the eyes, they're the most dangerous of all. So you rehearse them in silence. The soft glance, the modest blink, the lowered lids, the kind that say, I see you. But only as far as politeness allows. Never bold, never open. And if you're lucky, no one will ever accuse your eyes of saying something your mouth did not. Still, your eyes betray you. When a man speaks nonsense in the drawing room, you want to roll them. You don't. When a cousin makes a cruel joke and expects your laughter, you want to narrow them. You don't. When the minister's son stares at you too long at the harvest ball, you want to glare. Instead, you blink once and look away. This self-editing becomes constant, exhausting. You carry it with you to every meal, every gathering, every walk along the garden path, because being seen seeing is just as dangerous as being seen touched. You've heard the stories. One girl in Derbyshire supposedly smiled at a man on a train platform and met his eyes too long. He followed her for weeks, insisting it was a sign of affection. Her family had to relocate, not because she had done anything, but because she had looked. And then there are the letters, the awkward, unwanted letters. I saw you at the haberdashery, one man once wrote to your cousin, and your eyes said more than your lips could dare. She had never spoken to him, never seen him again, but he believed her eyes had promised something they hadn't. But in this world, a man's interpretation becomes your reputation, and that reputation, fragile as spun sugar, is yours to protect with every blink. You grow into the habit. By the time you're 20, you've mastered the 1,000-yard stare. Your eyes always rest a fraction below eye level, somewhere near the collarbone, just enough to be present, but never enough to be read. You even begin to admire the women who play the game well, those who flutter their lashes with military precision, who can smile with their mouth while their eyes stay neutral, who never ever look a man full in the face unless they intend to ruin him. Because that's the strange power of it. When you do meet a man's eyes deliberately, unflinchingly, it becomes a weapon, a signal, a dare. So potent that just once in your life you want to try it. And one day, perhaps you will. Maybe on a carriage ride with a window down, or in the hallway when no one else is around. Maybe with a stranger you'll never see again, just to test what your eyes can say when unchained. But not today. Today your glance stays modest, safe, vanilla, because a proper lady's eyes are not her own. They belong to everyone else. You're sitting at the dinner table again, this time at your uncle's estate, where the cutlery is heavier, the wine darker, and the rules somehow stricter. The table is long enough that you can barely make out what the guests at the far end are saying. Not that it matters. You're not expected to speak. You're expected to listen and smile. Maybe laugh quietly at the right moments. But speak. Not unless you are asked a direct question. And even then, your answer should be short, sweet, and entirely harmless. This isn't your first supper under such conditions. You've learned the flow. The men speak first, loudly, comfortably, often with their mouths full. They discuss Parliament, factory strikes, investments in India, or whether or not Darwin ought to be banned outright from polite conversation. They quote Latin. They misquote Shakespeare. They throw out opinions like apple cores, never worried where they'll land. You talk about the weather, the rose garden, perhaps the freshness of the scone, but only if someone else mentions them first. Because as a lady, you're not here to dominate the conversation. You're here to decorate it. Your voice should add color. Never wait. And never under any circumstance should you speak over a man. The worst thing you can be accused of is being too talkative. Worse still, opinionated. Your cousin was once both. At a dinner not unlike this one, she offered a counterpoint to a gentleman's views on Irish self-governance. Her argument was intelligent, measured, even polite. But you remember the moment after, the silence, the way the men blinked, the way her own father cleared his throat and reached for his drink with unnecessary force. Afterwards, her mother whispered to yours, "She really must learn not to speak so firmly." And so you learn. You learn that when someone says something wrong, you nod vaguely. When someone says something shocking, you offer a neutral murmur. And when someone says something clever, you laugh softly, even if you don't understand it. You become a master of filler phrases. How interesting. Oh, I hadn't thought of it that way. Indeed, you learn to speak without speaking, and to keep your true thoughts filed away in the same drawer where you keep your unsent letters and overdue dreams. You're not stupid, not by any measure. You read novels with complex heroines. You know which countries are at war and why. You secretly understand the basics of bookkeeping from helping your brother. But none of that belongs at this table. You're too clever for your own good, and clever girls don't get invitations or husbands. You reach for your glass and take a sip. Not too large. A lady never drains her cup. You dab at your lips, not because they need wiping, but because it buys you time. Something in you wants to say something. Add a point. Make a joke. Show that you two are real. But you don't. You let the conversation pass over you like mist, invisible, weightless. Because a proper woman's words must be like perfume, faint, pleasant, and never overpowering. As the courses change, fish then foul, then puddings layered with cream. You begin to notice how effortlessly the men fill the air. Their words form bridges across the table, while yours are expected to stay folded in your lap like your napkin. At one point, a gentleman speaks with great passion about steamships and their potential to conquer the East. He refers to the colonies as if they were exotic beasts waiting to be tamed. You know, because you've read that the subject is far more complicated. You know, names, dates, trade routes. You could ask a sharp question that would make him pause. You could add a single fact that would make him think twice. But your aunt once told you, "Darling, it's not that your ideas aren't interesting. It's that men don't come here for debate. They come to be admired." So you admire, or at least you pretend to. You offer your best nod. You murmur fascinating, even as your hands clench beneath the tablecloth. And that's the thing, isn't it? This isn't silence. It's camouflage. But not everyone plays the part well. There was a girl 2 seasons ago, Clara, daughter of solicitor. At a formal luncheon, she laughed at a gentleman's incorrect quotation of Aristotle and corrected him gently, kindly. She even apologized afterward, but it didn't matter. Word spread. People said she was embarrassing, untrained, ambitious, which in your world is one notch above immoral. She's not invited anymore. Her dance card emptied in less than a month. So you tuck the memory of Clara into your mind like a pressed flower, bright but fading, a warning. Later that night in the drawing room, the men are still talking. Their voices carry from behind the smoking door filled with brandy and unchecked opinions. You and the other women sit in a delicate ring near the piano. Someone begins to play softly. Someone else embroiders quietly, stitching roses into the edge of a handkerchief. You glance around and realize something chilling. No one is saying anything. Not really. There's conversation, yes, but it's carefully looped and trimmed like lace. No sharp edges, no tension, no heat. Just soft things. The weather, the neighbor's new puppy, a dress spotted in a shop window. Nothing that would upset the delicate arrangement of the evening. You wonder what would happen if you stood up and said something real. I disagree, or I read something today that moved me, or even I have a question. But of course, you don't, because to do so would not just be bold, it would be disruptive. It would disturb the fabric everyone's been trying to weave so tightly. And yet later in your room, your voice returns. You speak freely, even if only to yourself. You argue with no one. You laugh without lowering your volume. You imagine what it might be like to say things as they are, not as they ought to be. And you whisper just loud enough for the silence to hear. I do have something to say. No one interrupts. No one corrects you. And for a moment, your voice belongs wholly to you. You're standing in the parlor, gloved and perfectly still, waiting for introductions to finish. A distant cousin has just arrived from Kent, newly returned from the continent, well-traveled. And by the way, everyone seems to defer to him, undoubtedly a man of importance. The room turns toward you. Names are exchanged. He smiles politely. And now comes the moment of truth, the handshake. But you don't move. You don't extend your hand. You wait. Because in this delicate Victorian ballet, you must never be the first to offer your hand. Even if you've met the man before, even if you're excited to see him, even if your palms are sweating inside your kid leather gloves and your instincts scream for connection, you wait. If he offers his hand, you may respond. If he does not, you smile and nod and pretend it doesn't sting. You were taught this rule as early as your multiplication tables. A proper lady never initiates physical contact, not even the most innocent kind. The risk is too great. A handshake can be read as familiarity, or worse, forwardness. And forwardness is the slope that leads inevitably to ruin. Your brother, meanwhile, can shake hand with anyone, men, women, butchers, beggars, barristers. His grip is expected to be firm, assertive, a sign of strength. Yours must be soft, decorative, a response, not a beginning. You remember the story of Anne Imagigen? She once offered her hand first to a visiting clergyman. Not aggressively, just a polite gesture. But he recoiled slightly, surprised, said something about how modern things are becoming. Later he told someone that she had seemed eager. The word clung to her like smoke for months. So now when you introduce to a man, be he bishop or banker, you keep your hand close to your skirts. If he nods, you curtsy. If he extends his hand, You gently raise yours and let it rest like a feather in his palm. Never squeeze, never linger. The glove in this moment does more than conceal your skin. It acts as a barrier, a message. I am not available, not exposed, not claiming territory. And yet this one small gesture contains worlds. There are women who know how to manipulate it, who offer just a finger and look away to appear aloof. Others who press slightly too long to hint at interest. It's all performance rehearsed in silence, refined in boarding schools and parlors, judged instantly and without mercy. And if you misstep, if your fingers are too cold, too warm, too bare, too bold, you're not a lady. You're something else entirely. After the handshake moment passes, you feel it in your bones. Relief like a curtain has dropped. You didn't break the rule. You didn't embarrass your aunt or your mother or the generations of quiet women who came before you. Still, it lingers in your thoughts. How strange it is that something so small, the offering of a hand, can carry such weight. You retreat to the side of the room, pretending to study a vase of lees, while the gentlemen talk about train schedules and tariffs. Your hand, still tucked neatly against your waist, pulses with withheld energy. Sometimes you imagine what it would feel like to be the one to reach first, to walk into a room, arm extended, confident, and sure to clasp a hand like it means something. Not just politeness, but mutual presence. But Victorian women do not reach, they wait. You remember a particular afternoon, tea at the home of Lady Winthrop, whose house rules were stricter than any chapel. A young woman visiting from America had arrived, and in greeting the host's eldest son, extended her hand firmly, confidently. You still recall the way the boy's eyes widened, not unpleasantly, but with such shock that he dropped his monal into his cup. The room went utterly silent. Later, someone said the girl had probably been raised in commerce. Others muttered about New World manners. She was never invited back. You wonder where she is now. Perhaps happily married to someone who finds directness appealing. Or perhaps still shocking drawing room somewhere else. Reaching boldly into unshaken spaces. Back in the present, the conversation shifts. A gentleman turns toward you. He nods politely. You nod in return. That is the entire exchange. You'll be praised later for being appropriately reserved. It's not that you dislike handshakes. It's that handshakes belong to men. A handshake implies equality, even the smallest sliver of it. It is, after all, a greeting of equals, a shared grip, a brief union of presence. And you're not equal. Not here, not yet. Instead, your hands are for receiving gifts, letters, rings. They are meant to be admired, not engaged, softened with rose oil, covered in gloves, resting on embroidered lapcloths. They are meant to be still, but you think just sometimes of all the power your hand could hold if allowed. Not in the aggressive crush of a man's shake, but in a quiet offering that means, I am here. I see you. I choose this. Maybe one day in some future world, perhaps women will walk into rooms and extend their hands first, not out of boldness, but out of the certainty that they're allowed to. Until then, your handshake lives in your pocket, hidden, waiting. You're seated at your writing desk, late afternoon sun slanting through lace curtains. A half-written letter lies before you. Paper cream colored and crisp, edges uncreased, the faint scent of lavender pressed into the fibers. Your pen hovers above the page, and you hesitate, not over the words. Those have been rehearsed in your mind all morning. You're hesitating over the ink. You reach for the familiar black bottle. Safe, conservative, expected. But sitting beside it, almost glowing in the light, is something different. Violet ink. A tiny bottle gifted by your cousin, imported from Paris. It smells faintly of violets and rebellion. You want to use it desperately. You imagine how the loops of your handwriting would bloom in that lovely purple hue. How it would make your letter stand out. Charming, expressive, modern. But you don't, because in Victorian society, a lady's correspondence is judged not only by her grammar and penmanship, but by her aesthetic restraint. And violet ink, too romantic, too frivolous, too loud. The acceptable colors are few. Black for business and decorum. Brown sometimes for personal notes among family. Blue is a stretch. Red is strictly for correction, if used at all. Anything scented, glittered, or colored, well, that's a different story entirely. A letter written in violet ink might be charming in a French salon, but here in English drawing rooms, it borders on scandal. Not because of what you say, but because of how you say it. You recall the story of Miss Jane Tilling from Etiquette. She wrote her fiancé weekly letters while he was stationed in Kolkata. But one arrived, written in green ink, a bold, swirling script on thick lilac paper. His mother opened it first. The engagement was broken off within a month. No one ever said why. They didn't need to. The stationery spoke louder than the words inside. Your own mother once burned a note sent by a woman who used pink-tinged parchment and a violet seal. Smells like desperation, she said, tossing it into the fire with a flick of lace and disdain. So you dip your pen into the black. The ink clings to the nib like obedience. You write carefully, slowly. The tone must be light, but not silly, affectionate, but not forward. You avoid exclamations. You consider, and then discard the word dearest too familiar. You said all my kind regards, and underline nothing. Your handwriting, once expressive and looping in your private journals, is now clipped and legible. It must not suggest a mind too whimsical. It must appear calm, predictable, feminine. Because in Victorian etiquette, a letter is more than a message. It's a reflection of your soul. And your soul, if it hopes to marry well or be taken seriously, must be neatly folded and black-inked, sealed in wax with no trace of violet passion or ungoverned flair. When the letter is finished, you blot it gently. No smudges, no fingerprints. You fold it precisely into thirds, avoiding the crease that might misalign your closing salutation. You select a matching cream envelope. No embossing, no flourishes, just your initials in small gold lettering, barely noticeable. Now comes the seal. Your seal is plain, a small circle with a forget-me-not motif. Blue wax is permissible if subtle. Red wax is risky unless it's for condolences or business. Pink, reserved for women of looser reputations. You've heard whispers that a pink wax letter once caused a woman's invitation to the Queen's garden party to be revoked. No one could prove it was the letter, but no one doubted it either. You press the seal into the wax and wait. You hold the envelope like it's a fragile thing, because it is. This simple piece of paper can carry affection, ruin, misunderstanding, or marriage proposals. And every detail, ink, seal, spacing, spelling is ripe for judgment. Later at the post box, you notice other letters dropped in. One has a pale yellow ribbon wrapped around it. Another smells faintly of rose oil. You don't need to see the names. You already know what they'll say about the senders. She's rather bold. She reads French novels, I hear. Doesn't she have any male relatives to guide her? Because Victorian letter writing is not just a domestic task. It is a performance of femininity, carefully composed and tightly edited. It's the one space where you're allowed to speak, but only if you follow the rules. One girl in your circle, Elizabeth, with a quick smile and ink-stained fingers, writes in green sometimes. She says it reminds her of moss and spring and ideas. She once wrote to a publisher, submitting a poem using green ink on blue paper. The publisher returned it unread with a note. We do not review eccentric submissions. She cried not because of the rejection, but because the color had mattered more than the words. And this is the lesson that etches itself into your hand with every letter you write. You may feel deeply. You may dream wildly. You may ache to express something real. But your words must be clothed properly, modestly, predictably, in black. You tuck the sealed envelope into your basket and carry it to the corner for posting. As you walk, you think about the letter itself, how careful, how restrained it is, and how much it does not say, how it emits your small, beautiful thought about the garden and morning light, how it skips the poem line you wanted to include, but feared would seem too forward, how it masks your excitement, your nervousness, your hope. It's a polite letter, perfect, really. It says everything you're allowed to say, but not a word of what you mean. You're walking through the square when a sudden gust of wind sweeps around the corner, snatching at your bonnet ribbons and lifting the hem of your overcoat just enough to reveal the lace of your petticoat. Your hand jumps up instinctively to fix it, but then you remember you're in public. And in Victorian England, adjusting your clothing where others can see you is nearly as improper as exposing what lies beneath. So you freeze. You let the wind play with your hat for just a second longer, forcing your fingers to hover midair, undecided between modesty and restraint. In the end, you choose the latter. You lower your hand, straighten your back, and pretend the wind hasn't unsettled you at all. It's not that you're forbidden to fix yourself. Of course not. Everyone knows that pins slip, cuffs twist, bodices shift, but acknowledging it. Reaching down to tug a stocking, tightening a glove strap in full view, tugging at your corset lacing, or readjusting your skirts in the street. That's vulgar. A lady's appearance must always seem effortless. That's what your aunt used to say. She should look as if no part of her requires maintenance. As if your hat never slides to one side. As if your gloves never loosen. As if your corset never pinches or shifts or bites into your ribs. Even discomfort must be worn with grace. You once saw a woman scolded for adjusting the strap of her shoe while seated at a park bench. It was a small thing, quick, necessary, but someone saw her bare fingers touch the leather at her ankle. They said it was a most indecent moment. She didn't even look up afterward. She just folded her hands in her lap and pretended her shoe still fit. So, you do what you're taught. You let the lace flap a little in the breeze. You hold your chin a bit higher, pretending your bonnet isn't slipping backward. You walk slowly, deliberately, fighting the urge to tug, straighten, tuck, or pull. And once you're around the corner, finally out of sight, you duck behind a brick archway. You fix everything in under 10 seconds. Fingers fly over buttons and ties. You shake out your skirts, adjust your collar, smooth the rebellious bit of hair near your temple. Then you step back into view as if nothing ever needed fixing at all. Because that is the secret. A Victorian lady must look composed, even if everything is falling apart beneath the fabric. You've heard horror stories from the opera. The woman whose corset bond snapped mid-performance and slipped sideways under her dress. She spent the next 2 hours motionless, afraid that if she shifted, the entire gown would collapse like a tent with its pole yanked. She smiled through it all, and no one ever knew. Because no matter how uncomfortable, no matter how messy, no matter how human you feel underneath the layers, you're expected to maintain the illusion of perfection. Always back at home, your maid helps you undress. She unhooks the dozens of fasteners down your back, lifts layers of petticoats, peels the bodice off your shoulders, and with every layer removed, your posture softens just a little. Your arms no longer stiff at your sides. Your shoulders no longer held like delicate glass. You exhale. Your stays were crooked. Your maid murmurs as she unlaces them. Must have shifted at midday. You nod. You knew. You'd felt the twist just under your ribs after tea when the corset had begun to bite. But what could you do? Not in the street. Not in the shop. Not even in the powder room at Lady Hobson's. There are no private places for adjustment in a woman's world. Only invisible sufferings in public silence. Even mirrors can't always be trusted. You've learned to rely more on instinct than reflection. The feel of a waistband slipping, the ache of a crooked garter, the quiet panic of a bonnet strap that's pulled too tight but can't be touched until you're alone. Because to adjust yourself is to admit that you have a body. And admitting that you have a body means acknowledging that it moves, shifts, sweats, itches, bulges, cramps, fails to be perfect. And Victorian etiquette is built on the promise that a lady, if trained correctly, will appear untouched by these earthly flaws. You think often of that woman at the theater, the one whose glove came unbuttoned at the wrist. She spent 20 minutes holding her hand rigid, wrist turned just so that the dangling flap of leather didn't betray her. She never fixed it, never reached for it, just endured. Some called it grace, others called it martyrdom. And you understand both. There's a strange dignity in the discipline, a twisted kind of pride in knowing how to hold everything in place while inside. Your stocking is slipping down your calf, and your corset is digging into your side like a jealous twin. But you also wonder what would happen if you simply adjusted something in plain view. Nothing obscene, just a gentle tug, a pinch at the shoulder seam, a quick pat at your hip where the bustles began to sag. Would the world really end? Or would it gasp first? Would it tilt its head and say, "How indecent," then go home and wonder what else a woman like you dares to do? Because deep down, everyone knows what these rules are really for, to make sure you don't look like you exist, to keep you quiet, still, composed, to ensure you move through life like a painting on a wall, admired, preserved, but never permitted to stretch or yawn or shift your own weight. So tonight, before bed, you stand by the window. You scratch your shoulder. You roll your stocking down, and then up again, just because you can. And it feels electric. Not because anyone's watching, but because for once you are. The morning is unusually bright. The street is quiet. The air just cool enough to tug at the edges of your shawl. You've wrapped your bonnet ties in a perfect bow, your gloves buttoned at the wrist. Everything about you is tidy, presentable, modest. And yet, as you step outside your front gate without an escort, you feel it immediately, the shift in the air. It doesn't matter that your destination is only 4 blocks away. It doesn't matter that it's a respectable hour, that you walk with grace, that your shoes are polished. It doesn't even matter that you're not headed anywhere scandalous, just to the dressmakers to pick up a hemmed sleeve. All that matters is this. You are a woman. You are in public, and you are alone. In Victorian society, that combination raises questions because walking alone without your mother, your maid, your brother, or a married friend is not just inconvenient. It's suspicious. You pass a constable and drop your gaze, not because you're guilty of anything, but because he's already watching you longer than is polite. His eyes trail you like a thread. 2 women with parasol glance your way from across the street. One whispers something to the other. You catch the flicker of a raised eyebrow, then a soft laugh. Your steps slow, not from fear, but from calculation. Every street corner becomes a stage. Every passerby becomes a potential witness or judge. Because society has long agreed that a lady with nowhere to be, unaccompanied, must have questionable motives. She might be meeting a man. She might be selling something unspoken. She might simply be too bold for her own good. And that last suspicion, it sticks like cold dust. Your governor once told you, a woman's virtue is not only in her behavior, but in how she is perceived. And perception in the eyes of the Victorian world is as fragile as spun sugar. You reach the corner and pause at a row of carriages. A man tips his hat, polite maybe. You smile faintly and nod, just enough to be civil, not enough to invite anything further. But inside, a tension coils between your ribs. You shouldn't be doing this. You shouldn't be here alone in full view. If anything happens, anything at all, it will be your fault. Even the streets are built to reinforce this logic. No benches for women to rest alone. No public houses where you may stop without drawing attention. Even shopkeepers sometimes hesitate to serve you without a chaperone present. You've heard of women refused entry or worse, mistaken for working girls simply because they arrived on foot and without escort. There was that story, wasn't there? The widow who dared walk to the apothecary by herself after sunset. A man followed her home, told his friends. Within the week, no one respectable would call on her again. She moved away before the season ended. She only wanted to buy throat loans. You reach the dressmaker shop and step inside, the doorbell chiming softly behind you. For a moment, you exhale. You made it. No one said anything. No one followed you. But still you feel it. That lingering sense that you've done something almost brave. Though the action itself, simply walking, shouldn't require bravery at all. The shopgirl greets you with a smile, but there's a flicker of surprise in her eyes. No companion today, miss. You answer with something light. Only me this time. You say, try not to sound sheepish. She nods, but the moment stretches thin. Even she, who likely walks alone when running errands, marks your independence as notable. That's the contradiction, isn't it? Working women walk alone all the time. They deliver, fetch, serve, but they're not expected to guard their reputation the way you are. You are a lady, and the higher your station, the tighter the leash. 'Cause for a Victorian woman, virtue doesn't live in her mind or even in her home. It lives in her visibility, or more precisely, in her invisibility. You're not supposed to be seen wandering. You're supposed to be guided. And should anything unfortunate befall you on this walk, say a man speaks to you too familiarly, or you're seen turning down a street with no respectable business, the whispers will begin and they won't stop. This is why so many women rely on chaperones. Older ladies, governs, even younger siblings pressed into service to serve as human shields. The chaperone isn't just there for safety. She's there to absolve you. If anyone sees you, they see 2 women, not one. One to do the walking, the other to serve as witness that nothing improper occurred. You've heard of men trailing unaccompanied women, not to harm them, but to observe them, to gather just enough for gossip. Who was she meeting? Did she linger at that doorway? Did she look at him too long? And what if you trip? Just imagine falling in the street, skirt rumpled, glove muddied, bonnet askew, a man helping you up, a conversation, a touch, and no chaperone to explain. In that one moment, you become a story told by others, a rumor that walks faster than you ever could. You pay for your dress alterations and prepare to leave, but hesitate. Going home the same way feels vulnerable. You consider taking a different street, less traveled, less visible. But then you think of the stories. A woman seen cutting through the alley near the bakery. A woman spotted behind the church gardens. A woman heard laughing with a man near the coachyard. Each one punished, not with arrest, but with absence. Invitations stop. Letters go unanswered. You become that girl without anyone saying exactly what you did. So you take the long way home through the busiest streets, past familiar windows. You walk with your spine tall, your expression neutral, your pace slow and ladylike. Not too fast, not too purposeful. You must look as though you're not trying to be alone. And when you reach your gate and step inside, unseen by anyone, only then do you breathe freely. You walk 4 blocks alone, and no one can take that away from you. But tomorrow you'll bring your sister, just in case. You're late. Not terribly so, just enough that your stomach tightens with urgency. The dressmaker closes at noon. Your hat is already pinned, your boots laced, the package you promised to deliver tucked neatly under your arm. And still you walk. Not run, not hurry. Walk. Because in Victorian England, a woman never runs. Even when she's late, even when it's raining, even when her younger brother is sprinting ahead, waving her onward with both arms, she does not run. Because running implies desperation. Because running disrupts grace. Because running jiggles things. And if there is one thing a Victorian lady must not do, it is jiggle. You remember the first time you saw someone run in public. It was a housemaid, a girl of maybe 16, dashing out the back garden to chase a laundry sheet whipped free by the wind. Her hair fell loose from its pins. Her skirts flew up at the sides. One stocking leg was visible for an entire second. Your governess turned pale. Disgraceful, she said, though the girl hadn't seen us watching. She'll never find a proper place, she added. It wasn't the running that shocked her. It was what the running revealed. A woman with a body, a woman with urgency, a woman with purpose. Victorian society does not like its women purposeful. Movement is a form of expression, and running, sprinting, sweating, panting suggests far too much physicality. It suggests a woman who is not contained, who is not fragile, who might not stop when she is told. So instead, you walk quickly but with measured steps. 1, 2, 1, 2. Heels clicking politely against the cobblestones. You feel the pressure of time nipping at your heels. But you resist because running would be worse than being late. Even your clothing conspires against it. Your boots are narrow at the toe. Your skirts are layered, heavy, and would trip you if you move too freely. And your corset, tight as it is, makes deep breathing nearly impossible. Try to run in a corset and you'll find yourself out of breath in under 30 seconds. Try to sprint and you might faint. Which is ironic because fainting in public, so long as you do it delicately, is far more acceptable than running. You pass a group of schoolboys kicking a ball between them. One darts across your path laughing. His knees are bare, his face red with exertion. No one stops him. No one scolds. They are boys. They are meant to move. You are not. Your movement must be decorative, not functional. You may glide. You may promenade. You may at most bustle, but never bolt. You make it to the shop just in time, barely. The door is still open, and the shopkeeper glances up as you arrive, flushed but composed. You resist the urge to bend over to catch your breath. That would be unseemly. Instead, you nod, adjust your gloves, and pretend your lungs aren't begging for a proper inhale. The truth is, the physical consequences of not running are minor. You'll be a few minutes late. You might miss someone by moments. The real cost is internal. The slow erosion of agency. Every time you must choose poise over urgency, decorum over momentum. And this isn't just about city streets. Even in rural spaces, even in your own garden, you don't run. Not even when you want to chase the dog. Not even when your skirt snags on a thorn bush and you're left hopping awkwardly on one foot. Not even when it rains and the first heavy drop lands right in the middle of your bonnet. You've been trained to prioritize appearance above all else. You think of the running girl stories, passed among women in whispers. Not the scandalous kind, just odd ones, unsettling, like the vicar's daughter who ran across the lawn barefoot after a letter blown by the wind. Some say her foot was visible. Others say she laughed too loudly as she ran. Either way, the story ends the same. And after that, she was different. Not bad, just different, which in this world is the same thing. You've also heard of a young woman who tripped while running for a train. Her hat flew off, her corset loosened, and two strangers had to help her to her feet. She never received a marriage proposal after that. It wasn't that she had done anything wrong. It was that she'd shown the world too much of herself. Running reveals things. It reveals curves. It reveals urgency. It reveals that you are a person, not a painting. And that is the greatest crime of all. After picking up your hem sleeve, you walk home a polite pace. You feel the burn in your thighs, the sweat prickling under your stays. But you smile at the passerby who tips his hat. You lift your chin as you pass the same two women from earlier. You are pleasant, unrushed, ladylike. But later, when you're alone in your room, you kick off your boots, toss aside your corset, and run. Not far, just a circle around the rug, skirts gathered in your arms, hair tumbling loose behind you. You don't run with grace or elegance. You run with the clumsy glee of someone remembering how it feels to move with purpose. No one sees. No one stops you. And in that brief, breathless loop, you reclaim the one thing you weren't meant to have. Urgency. You've just heard something truly funny. Not merely amusing. Not politely chuckle-worthy. Actually funny. The kind of thing that bubbles up unexpectedly, catches you off guard, and begs for a laugh that erupts, not trickles. But you stop yourself because in Victorian society a proper lady's laughter is delicate, decorative, and above all contained. No snorts, no gapers, no shoulders shaking, no head thrown back, no unladylike gasping for breath. You press your lips together and allow the smallest sound to escape. Something like a sigh in fancy dress, a closed mouth flutter, a gloved giggle, nothing more. Because here's the rule no one writes down, but every woman knows. Loud laughter equals loose morals. Even joy must be managed. You learned this young at your first formal tea. Perhaps when you giggled too hard at your cousin's joke about a chicken and the chimney sweep. A joke so silly it deserved no dignity. But still it made you laugh. And your governess placed her hand gently on your wrist, smiled tightly, and said, "Remember, dear, a lady laughs with her eyes, not her lungs." You never forgot that. Since then, you've watched yourself carefully. You've studied how the other women do it, how they cover their mouths with lace-trimmed handkerchiefs, how they tilt their heads and murmur. Oh, how droll instead of actually laughing. How even humor must be filtered through the lens of control. You've seen what happens when a woman forgets. At a garden party last year, the vicar told a terrible joke about a cow and a bishop. It wasn't funny, and that was precisely why everyone laughed the polite amount, then stopped, except for Miss Hargreaves. She laughed too long, too hard. She threw her head back and actually clapped her hands. And just like that, the air changed. Someone coughed. A man muttered, "Goodness." Her laugh rang out alone, echoing awkwardly against the trimmed hedges. She blushed. She stopped. She wasn't invited back because a woman's laughter, if too loud, becomes dangerous. It suggests boldness, confidence, worse, independence. A woman who laughs freely might also speak freely, move freely, even think freely. And Victorian society has no comfortable place for such a woman. It's not just about volume. It's about tone. A proper laugh should not draw attention to itself. It should not suggest that you find something too funny or that you're too familiar with the person who said it. You learn to modulate, to flatten your delight. At parties, you practice what you call the social chuckle. A soft H paired with a slight incline of the head. It says, "I heard the joke. I understood it. I approve of its existence." But it never gives away how funny you actually thought it was. You have pages of unwritten rules filed in your brain. If a gentleman makes the joke, laugh but briefly. If a woman makes the joke, smile, but only if it isn't at anyone's expense. If a servant says something funny, you didn't hear it. And if you say something funny, best pretend you didn't. Because laughing at your own joke, that's practically a declaration of vanity. You once laughed out loud at something you'd read. A satirical piece in Punch magazine. It caught you by surprise. The sound escaped you before you could trap it. Your mother sewing nearby didn't even look up. She just said, "Reel that back in, darling." And just like that, you learned again that there is such a thing as excessive joy. And it's not just your family. Etiquette books have full paragraphs devoted to the subject. One recommends that a lady's laugh should be like the fluttering of chimes in a light breeze, audible but never startling. Another insists that any woman who laughs with her mouth wide open is unfit for respectable company. You begin to notice how often men are allowed the opposite. Their laughter fills drawing rooms, bellows across garden lawns, rattles decanters. A good laugh makes them appear jovial, well-liked. For you, it would make you look vulgar. There's even a term they whisper for women like that. Those who laugh too loudly, too freely, boisterous. It sounds like a sin. And so, when you feel laughter begin to rise like bubbles in a sealed bottle, you become an expert in turning it into something else. A smile, a hum, a carefully timed cough. But later when you're alone, truly alone, you remember. You recall a joke. Maybe one your sister made. Maybe something you saw on the street, a gesture, a line, the image of a goose waddling after a constable perhaps. And you laugh. Really laugh. You clutch your sides, snort without shame, throw your head back, and let it ring through your empty room like a bell set free. It feels absurd and wonderful and slightly rebellious. You laugh until your ribs hurt, until your cheeks flush, until tears blur your vision. Then you lie back against the pillow, sighing, not because you're tired, but because tomorrow you'll have to laugh quieter again. You're at another dinner. This one's smaller, quieter. Just family and a few of your father's acquaintances. The conversation drifts easily from horses to shipping lanes to inevitably science. One gentleman, a balding man with spectacles and an air of someone who collects fossils in his waistcoat pocket, mentions the origin of species. You recognize the title immediately. You read it months ago by candlelight, long after the rest of the house had gone to sleep. You remember the thrill of it, the daring suggestion that humans were not divine accidents, but part of something ancient, evolving, astonishingly connected. You'd had to hide the book, of course. Your mother found it once and frowned so deeply you thought her face might stay that way. A troubling thing. She called it unladylike material. And now as this man speaks about natural selection, adaptation, evidence, you feel a spark. You want to join. You want to say, "I read it too. I found it fascinating. I have questions. I have thoughts." But you don't. Because in Victorian society, a well-bred woman must not speak with authority on science, politics, philosophy, or theology. And Darwin, that's the dangerous intersection of all four. You're allowed to dabble in poetry, of course, in watercolors, in music that does not stir the soul too violently, but biology, evolution, monkeys, human ancestry. That's not conversation, it's corruption. You sip your wine and listen. The men around the table debate politely. Some scoff, others nod thoughtfully. One quotes Genesis, another raises an eyebrow and mutters something about ape-like features in Parliament. The joke lands awkwardly, but they laugh anyway. Meanwhile, you sit perfectly still, your hands folded in your lap, your thoughts racing, because you remember the passage about the Galapagos finches, how their beaks had changed depending on the island, how that alone suggested time as a sculptor, not a divine spark. You remember being stunned, not because it was scandalous, but because it was logical, beautiful even. But here at this table, to say so would be to risk everything. Your father's respect, your place in the room, perhaps even your standing as marriageable. Because a woman with opinions on science, especially one that challenges religious norms, is troubling. She's not charming. She's not agreeable. She becomes that kind of woman, the kind who corrects men, the kind who reads too much, the kind who ends up unmarried and writing letters to editors under a pseudonym. You could join the conversation, but you won't because in this world, curiosity must be quiet, especially when it is yours. The man across from you continues, animated now, waving his fork like a conductor. He references geological strata, fossils of extinct beasts, and how the church is struggling to contain the implications. Someone chuckles, another mutters, "Yes, well, if we're all descended from apes, that explains my cousin." The table laughs politely. You smile because that's your role, but it's a hollow smile. You're not thinking about cousins or monkeys. You're thinking about the way Darwin described nature. Not static, but shifting, not fixed, but unfolding across centuries. And you wonder, not for the first time, what if everything expected of you is not fixed either? But you don't say it aloud because cleverness in a woman is suspicious, and cleverness paired with controversial knowledge is dangerous. You've heard of women who cross that line. Miss Devo, a friend of your mother's, once offered her opinion on heliocentrism at a dinner party in Bath. She said something about planetary orbits and the shift from divine perfection to cosmic indifference. She never married, not because she was unpleasant. She was stunningly beautiful, but because, as someone once whispered, she has opinions that sit too close to the bone. Another woman, just a year older than you, was caught reading Darwin and writing notes in the margins. Her fiancé called it a lapse in character. He broke off the engagement. She now volunteers at the library and speaks very little. They called her curious, not as a compliment. That's the part that stings. Your mind is alive with questions about science, about truth, about your place in this careful world. But you're allowed none of it. Not allowed. Not if you want to be invited again. Not if you want to be safe. So you develop strategies. You hide your books behind embroidery kits. You scribble thoughts in coded journals. You read philosophy only when your maid is dusting the back rooms. And when someone brings up science, as they do tonight, you keep your face serene, nod when appropriate, and fold your real thoughts deep within the space between your ribs and your corset. But later, long after the guests have gone and the fire is dimmed, you return to your room, pull that worn copy of The Origin of Species from beneath your pillow, and read. Your lamp glows softly. The air is still. And here alone, you're allowed to think. You trace a line with your fingertip. Endless forms most beautiful and most wonderful have been and are being evolved. And you feel something stir in you again. Not scandal, not sin, just possibility. You close the book and whisper the forbidden name into the dark. Darwin. It doesn't sound dangerous here. It sounds like freedom. You spot her across the street. Your cousin Eliza. She's just stepped out of the milliner's with a bright bundle under one arm and her bonnet tilted at a rakish angle, looking positively radiant in the early afternoon sun. Your first instinct is pure and immediate. You want to wave. You want to call her name, laugh, dash across the street, and tell her how horrid Mrs. Langford was at luncheon, and how the chicken was so dry it might have been made of paper. But your hand freezes halfway into the air. Your lips part then shut just as quickly. Because in Victorian society, a lady does not draw attention to herself in public, not even to say hello, especially not to wave or shout across the street. Doing so would be considered vulgar, almost boisterous. And we know what the word implies for women. It slides quickly from unladylike to unrespectable. You glance around. There are men on the pavement, two in top hats discussing shipping contracts, a postman unloading letters from a rattling cart, and a governess guiding two stiff-necked children down the cobbled walk. So instead of waving, you do what's proper. You nod barely, a faint twitch of the chin, the sort of acknowledgement that could, if necessary, be passed off as simply shifting your bonnet ties. Eliza doesn't see you, and just like that, the moment is gone. This is the rule no one warns you about, but everyone expects you to obey. A woman must never make noise in the street. Her presence must be like perfume, noticeable only when someone is close enough to already be allowed there. As a child, you were warned against shouting in public under any circumstance. Your mother once saw a flower girl in the corner holler to her sister and muttered like a fishwife. Absolutely scandalous. You had no idea what a fishwife was, but the way she said it made your stomach drop. You learned to walk quietly, to keep your parasol close, not swinging, to ensure your boots didn't click too loudly on the cobblestones. You even learned to breathe more softly if a man passed too close. And as for waving, well, that's a fast road to ruin, isn't it? After all, waving implies enthusiasm, boldness, a lack of self-containment, and above all, it implies familiarity, which for a Victorian woman is the most dangerous illusion of all. Of course, there are exceptions. If you're in a private carriage gliding through Hyde Park during the fashionable hour, and you see a friend from your finishing school, yes, you may lift a gloved hand slightly, perhaps no higher than your shoulder, but the fingers must stay together. The movement slow and dignified. Not a wave, not really. More of a gesture of acknowledgement, like a feather fluttering in a polite breeze. But to raise your hand above your head, to call someone's name in joy, to run toward them, that would be nothing short of social calamity. There's a story that floats around tea rooms like a cautionary hymn. A woman, an actual Vic Count's daughter no less, was seen waving frantically at a friend across the Royal Arcade. She even called her name twice. The friend, mortified, pretended not to see her. Onlookers exchanged sharp glances, and by the end of the week, the poor woman had become a ghost. No more dinner invitations, no more seats and carriages. Her crime too visible, too audible. You often wonder how much joy has been muffled behind these rules. How many squeals of recognition swallowed? How many arms lowered half raised in excitement? How many steps hesitated when the heart wanted to run? You're not supposed to ask, but you feel the ache of it in your limbs, in your throat, in the electric sting behind your eyes when you spot someone you love and have to pretend you don't. So instead, you rehearse every encounter like a play. If you spot someone in public, you're to approach with quiet grace. No sudden gestures, no raised voices. Once close enough, you may greet them, but even then only if they are equal or higher in social rank. You must not be the first to speak if you're unsure. It's all designed to prevent spontaneity. And spontaneous women, they're the ones who don't get invited back. Your brother once asked in jest why you and your friends never called to one another like the boys did. You said, because we're not supposed to exist when we're out of the house. He laughed. You didn't, because deep down there's some truth in that. The Victorian lady is meant to glide. Quiet, measured, deliberate. She must never disrupt the rhythm of the street, never call out across a shop, never draw the eye, even if that eye belongs to someone she loves. So you nod. You smile faintly. You move on. And later when you're home and alone, you write Eliza a letter, not a quick note, a proper one. You describe the ribbon in her bonnet, the color of the package under her arm, the way the light caught her sleeve like a silk flame. And you end it with, forgive me for not saying hello. You look lovely. I wish I could have shouted it. You fold it, seal it, and let the ink say what your voice could not. The parlor is warm from the fire, and your hands are beginning to sweat beneath your gloves. They itch slightly at the wrist where the lace meets skin, but you don't dare tug at them. Not yet. There are men in the room, not just your father and brother, but guests. Gentlemen in dark coats with polished boots and neatly trimmed facial hair. One of them is already watching you over the rim of his teacup. You saw him arrive with Mr. Atwell, the solicitor. He's quiet, observant, and hasn't stopped glancing at your hands, which is precisely why you must keep them covered. Because in Victorian etiquette, removing your gloves in the presence of a man, especially one not family, was often considered surprisingly intimate, even provocative. It doesn't matter that your gloves are too tight from the summer humidity. It doesn't matter that the seams press into your knuckles. It doesn't matter that all you want is to let your fingers breathe. A lady knows that gloves are more than fabric. They're a barrier, a symbol of performance. And removing them, that's a private act. There's an odd weight to that idea, isn't there? Something so simple, peeling back a bit of kid leather or lace, could be taken as a suggestion, a quiet invitation. Some women ignore the rule, of course, the bold ones or the American ones. You've heard tales of a widow in New York who unbuttoned her gloves during a dinner party. Right in the middle of the soup course, the hostess dropped her spoon. A man coughed so violently he spilled consomme down his waistcoat. You imagine that scene often, not because you long to cause a stir, but because, well, you do sometimes long to be free of layers, of rules, of the endless dance of knowing who is watching you, and when and how they are interpreting every movement. But here in England, in this carefully constructed drawing room, you're expected to keep your hands hidden. Even though hands tell stories, even though hands are how you sew, write, clean, and comfort, even though the men in this very room are free to show their ink-stained fingers, their calluses, their wedding rings, their imperfections, you stay wrapped because the ungloved hand might say too much. The deeper secret, of course, is that glove removal wasn't just intimate, it was ritualistic. In some courtships, removing a glove was akin to lifting a veil. It was a slow, deliberate gesture that said, you may see a piece of me now, just this much. Entire manuals existed describing the correct way to take off a glove. First the buttons, never tug, then finger by finger. Each movement fluid and modest, never rushed. And heaven forbid you should bite the tip to get it loose. That apparently belonged to the theater girls. The ones men whispered about, but never married. You've seen paintings of women with one glove removed, the other still on. It's always the right hand, the one you'd use to greet someone. A subtle signal in portraiture that a woman was both approachable and still respectable. A woman in both gloves off. Well, that was for private viewing, for husbands or artists with their brushes tilted at scandal. Even in daily life, the ritual persisted. At afternoon teas, gloves stay on. At dinner, gloves off, but only one seated. At church, gloves on until kneeling. And if you forget any of this, you're not just seen as careless, you're seen as unladylike. Once you were invited to a small concert in a conservatory. You remember the golden light through the greenhouse glass, the violins warming up, the scent of pressed lemon leaves and waxed floors. And you remember just before the music began, a woman near you slipped off her glove too quickly. The man beside her turned slightly, just his eyes, no movement, and it felt like the entire room held its breath. Was it seduction? Was it a mistake? Was it rebellion? That's the strangest part. No one would ever ask her, because what mattered wasn't her intention. What mattered was how others interpreted it. And that's the rule Victorian women live beneath. Not what you mean, but what they see. You used to think the rule was silly. Now you understand it's something worse. Limiting. Because sometimes on summer evenings, you'd love to remove your gloves and let the cool wind kiss your wrists. You'd love to show someone the ink stain on your thumb from writing too long. You'd love to clasp a hand, not through fabric, but real skin to skin, and feel it return the pressure. But instead, you smile politely. You fold your hands together in your lap, and when no one is looking, you flex your fingers beneath the gloves just to remind yourself they're still yours. It happens suddenly. You're at a garden party, balancing a cup of tepid tea in one hand and a plate of invisible cucumber sandwiches in the other. A gentleman joins your circle, older, distinguished, with that kind of receding hairline that suggests wisdom rather than wear. He speaks charmingly in that half-murred way that implies his words are always important. You tilt your head, smile, and without thinking, you ask the forbidden question, "And how old are you, Mr. Lambert?" The effect is instant. The woman beside you lets out a faint cough that sounds suspiciously rehearsed. Another stirs her cup too vigorously. He third stares down at her gloves, as if they've suddenly transformed into maps of the Alps. Mr. Lambert himself freezes, then laughs, though it's the brittle kind that doesn't reach the eyes. You realize too late you've broken etiquette. Because in the Victorian age, it wasn't just rude for a man to ask a woman's age. No, the far more curious rule was that women too were not allowed to inquire about a man's age. Not even out of innocent curiosity. Not even if the man in question looked like he'd personally shaken hands with Napoleon. Why? Because asking a man's age implied impertinence. That you were thinking in terms of numbers, calculation, eligibility. It was seen as questioning his vitality, suggesting perhaps that he was too old or not old enough for something, marriage, politics, business. You were stepping out of your lane, and a lady must never appear calculating. The expectation is that you float through social life, gently with no sharp edges, that you accept what's given. Introductions, tea, occasionally a proposal, without poking too hard at the package, even if you're dying to know what's inside. So instead, you're taught to infer, to guess. You're told to assess age through gray hair, not birthdays, through the tone of a man's knees, when he kneels to retrieve a dropped glove, through the vintage of his waistcoat, the stiffness of his joints when he dances, all without saying a word. It's particularly strange, you think, that women were expected to answer that question constantly, at every debut, at every ball, in every letter from a matchmaking ad. How old is she now? They'd ask, peering through lawnettes as if your face alone didn't give it away. And yet, you were never permitted to return the question. Because a woman's age was about value. A man's age, that was about status. Ask a woman's age, and you're weighing her bloom, her prospects, her fading. Ask a man's age, and you risk revealing weakness. The passage of time that no gentleman likes acknowledged. It wasn't just rude. It was almost insubordination. You remember your cousin Louise telling you about a blunder she made at a formal dinner. She had been seated next to a balding gentleman with rheumy eyes who had introduced himself with an exaggerated bow. She thought it would be charming to tease. "Have you seen the great exhibition, Mr. Harlan? Or were you there for Waterloo?" It was a joke. She was 17, but he didn't laugh. Instead, he turned slowly and said, "A lady should not speak of a gentleman's years, especially when she has so few of her own." Louise didn't eat her dessert that night, and she never joked like that again. The lesson was clear. Your curiosity is dangerous, especially when it's directed upward, because in the rigid hierarchy of Victorian gender and class, knowledge was power, and women weren't meant to wield it. A question, especially one as simple as, "How old are you?" could tip the scales, could turn invisible gaze into a spotlight, could rattle a man's carefully constructed image. So instead, you perfect the art of silence wrapped in interest. You tilt your head, smile gently, let the men talk about the Crimean War and gas lamps and the railway expansion, and piece together their age from their memories. Sometimes you get it wrong. Sometimes they surprise you. Sometimes you stop caring altogether, but you never ask again. Because in this world, there are questions women simply don't get to ask, even when they know the answers would be fascinating. You feel it rising before you can stop it. A bubble of laughter, sharp and sudden, brought on by something absurd. Your cousin whispered, just out of earshot from Aunt Marjorie. It catches you off guard, and for a moment it escapes. A real, chest-deep laugh. The kind that makes your ribs tremble and your hand clutch the armrest. The parlor goes silent. Only the clock ticks. Somewhere behind you, a fan slows. And just like that, your laughter becomes a scene. Because in the refined, chokingly proper world of Victorian etiquette, any public display of strong emotion from a woman, whether joy, rage, grief, or even affection, was considered dangerously close to madness. Hysteria, they'd say, lack of breeding, loss of feminine control. Men could pound fists at political dinners or bellow in hunting stories, but you must remain composed always. To laugh too loudly, to cry in frustration, to raise your voice, even a cheer, could mark you as unstable or worse, emotional. And emotional was code, not for weakness, but for something even more shameful, instability. So when your shoulders shake with that laugh, you clamp your mouth shut. Your hand flies up too late to cover it, and you feel the room recalibrate. Eyes avert, teacups clink. No one speaks of it, but everyone noticed. You're reminded of poor Elenina Langley. Her brother died, suddenly, in a riding accident, and when she sobbed openly at his funeral, clutching his coat to her chest and refusing to let it go, she was sent away for rest, they said, to a sanatorium by the sea. She was 17. You heard whispers months later. She had fits, emotional ones. They said it all started at the funeral when she didn't maintain proper composure. That story plays in your mind, now, even as the laughter fades. Because in this society, grief is acceptable only if it's beautiful. Joy is permitted only if it's quiet, and anger never. The cruelest part of it is how you must rehearse your feelings in silence before you're allowed to show them in public. Grief must be tidy. Delight must be contained. Excitement should be edited into a single raised eyebrow or a light clap with gloved hands. Even love, that most human of emotions, must be subdued. You're allowed perhaps a soft sigh, a downward gaze, but to cry when he proposes, too dramatic to beam when he enters the room. Unladylike to run into his arms after weeks apart. That borders on vulgar. You remember reading in one of the endless conduct books on your mother's shelf that a true lady is like still water, calm on the surface even if storms churn beneath. So you become an actress. You learn to disguise trembling as cold, to turn tears into coughs, to walk away when your hands start to shake. And when emotions do slip through, when your voice cracks or your breath hitches, you rush to correct it, to smile through it, to act as though nothing happened. Because the punishment isn't just embarrassment, it's reputation. There's even a phrase they whisper at balls when someone causes a scene. She lost her composure. It sounds so gentle, but you know what it really means. She lost control. She became frightening. She stopped being safe to marry. You once saw a woman break down in public at a lecture of all places. A scholar had mocked a female scientist, and she, perhaps a student, stood and called out his hypocrisy. Her cheeks flushed, her voice rose. It only lasted seconds. She was escorted out. The scholar didn't even pause. He sipped water, then carried on. And the girl, no one ever saw her at another lecture again. Because a woman who shows too much passion is considered unnatural, too clever, threatening, too angry, hysterical, too happy, untrustworthy, too sad, dangerous. So now when someone insults you or praises you, you smile the same small smile. You thank them politely. You wait until you're alone, until you're safe behind a closed door, and then you let the feeling out. A laugh into a pillow, a cry into your gloves, a furious, shaking breath. Because in this world, they've confused stillness with sanity and convinced you that being human is somehow impolite. The wind is crisp this morning as you step out into the street. Gloved hands tucked neatly around a reticule no larger than a small loaf of bread. Your bonnet shades your eyes from the sun. But even so, you spot him, an older gentleman, perhaps someone your family once dined with at Lady Thistlebrook's supper. Your instinct is simple, harmless. You incline your head, just the faintest nod, the gentlest mark of recognition. But then the man pauses. He tips his hat. He begins walking toward you. Your breath catches because you've just made a mistake. One so small, so deeply human, and yet so scandalously significant in the etiquette world of Victorian women. You nodded at a man to whom you weren't formally introduced. And in doing so, you sent a signal, not of respect, not of manners, but of invitation. In this world where every glance can be misinterpreted, and every gesture dissected, even a simple nod is loaded. You have, according to unwritten social code, extended a familiarity that has not been earned. And that, for a woman, is dangerous. Because respectable ladies do not seek acknowledgement. They receive it. You nod at strange man, and suddenly you are no longer the mystery in muslin, the proper shadow behind the fan. You're the girl who looks, the one who speaks, the one who signals availability. You glance around now, acutely aware of how such a moment could spiral. Imagine if someone saw your aunt perhaps, from behind a lace curtain window, or Mrs. Whipple's daughter, the one who writes letters full of other people's business. And worse, what if the man misunderstood your nod entirely? What if he followed you, or tried to speak with you again in public? 'Cause etiquette isn't just about manners here. It's about survival. A single misstep could brand you something you are not, and society is never quick to forget. You think back to a story you overheard once, told in hushed tones by two older ladies arranging flowers at the back of the church. It was about a girl from Sussex, modest and well-bred, who once dared to smile and nod at a visiting officer while boarding a train. No words exchanged, no invitation offered, just a polite tilt of the chin. But that nod was seen by someone, then whispered to someone else. And by the time the week ended, her reputation had changed, not because of what she did, but because of how it was told. They said she was too forward, that she acknowledged a stranger, and eventually that she must have been courting him in secret. By summer, she was no longer invited to teas. By autumn, her name had quietly vanished from the guest list of a ball her mother once helped organize. Because it wasn't just a nod, it was the meaning assigned to it. And once a woman was suspected of being improper, no number of white gloves or chaperones could scrub the label off. You glance down now at your own gloved hands and wonder how such a tiny gesture can carry so much weight. Even in the etiquette books, this rule is written obliquely, phrased in terms like decorum and modesty, as if merely acknowledging a man without permission implies some hidden intent. The logic goes like this. A nod means you recognize him. Recognition implies familiarity. Familiarity suggests history. And history in this era can only mean intimacy. You find it absurd, but dangerous absurdities are the ones most rigorously enforced. And so you train yourself to look through men rather than at them. If someone tips his hat, you look past his shoulder. If someone catches your eye on the promenade, you adjust your bonnet ribbon and feign distraction by a passing carriage. You become a master of avoidance as defense. Your world narrows not because of laws, but because of suggestions sharpened into rules. Rules that say, don't speak first, don't wave, don't nod, don't be seen noticing anyone you haven't been handed by name. Because even the smallest nod can be a door. And once it opens, you may never be able to close it again. It's laundry day, and you're kneeling by the hearth, folding your underthings with the practiced precision of someone who knows that even a stocking, especially a stocking, can make or break a reputation. You reach for a pair you've never dared to wear in public. Soft crimson, delicate weave, a gift from your cousin who visited Paris and came back full of strange ideas. You remember her whispering with mischief. In France, women wear all colors, even scarlet, and no one bats an eye. But this is not Paris. This is England. This is Victoria's world. And here, the wrong color on your ankle could stain your entire name. You tug gently at the red pair and tuck them back into the drawer. Because here, even what's hidden beneath your skirts must obey the invisible rules. Stockings must be pale, white, cream, gray at most. Anything brighter hints at something indecent. In fact, to wear stockings in red, green, or blue was in some circles to be accused of trying to imitate theatrical women. A polite way of saying prostitutes or actresses. It seems absurd now, doesn't it, that a splash of color around the ankle could suggest a splash of color in your character. But this was the logic of the time. Dull colors, modesty, virtue, marriageable. And so stockings became symbols, a secret code stitched in silk. A woman who wore bright stockings might not be serious. She might be looking to be seen. And in Victorian society, wanting to be seen was one of the worst things you could be accused of. You remember once spotting a girl at the back of the chapel with green stockings peeking beneath her hem just for a second, enough to make the two ladies in front of you nudge each other and purse their lips. No one said her name, but everyone knew it. There's something almost laughable about it. How something hidden, something never meant to be seen, could carry such consequence. But that was the peculiar genius of Victorian etiquette. It governed not only the public eye, but the possibility of being seen. You sit at the edge of your bed now, lifting the hem of your dress just enough to check. Pale gray stockings, safe, boring, invisible, just the way society prefers its women. Because color in this context isn't about beauty, it's about control. A splash of crimson means defiance. A bold pattern means you've forgotten your place. And God forbid they catch sight of lace, decorative lace of all things, on your calves. That borders on seduction. The moral panic around bright stockings was especially directed at younger women, those just entering the marriage market, because bright meant bold, and bold meant trouble. You remember an old magazine warning mothers to inspect their daughters' laundry baskets for any inappropriate hosiery, as if rebellion began at the ankles. There's a fringe story you once overheard at a cousin's wedding about a debutante who wore lavender stockings to a garden party. The kind of soft, delicate lavender that matched her bonnet ribbon. She thought she'd be clever, coordinated, fashion-forward. But when she crossed her legs just a little too far, the lavender peeked out, and by the end of the week, someone had penned a cruel little rhyme about her that made the rounds in all the drawing rooms. Lavender legs and licorice lips. A girl with color, a girl who slips. No one said it to her face, but she wasn't invited to the next two dances. So, you learn quietly, carefully. You learn that modesty isn't just about behavior. It's a palette, and your world becomes beige, cream, washed out. Because the brighter you are, the more you threaten to be noticed. And in this time, being noticed is perilous. The morning sun pours in gently through your lace-curtained window, casting soft shadows over the vanity table. You're nearly ready. Gloves smoothed, shoes buttoned, parasol folded just so. You reach for the final touch. Your hat. Not because it's stylish, though it is. Not because it's cold, though it's brisk. But because stepping outside without a hat as a Victorian woman would be like stepping out half-dressed. Even if you're just walking next door to deliver a basket of scone. Even if you're running late for the train. Even if you're simply standing on your own porch for a bit of air. No hat, no dignity. In this world, your hat is not just fashion. It is a symbol of respectability, a line drawn between ladies and others. Without it, you risk being mistaken for someone of ill root or worse, someone free. Because a bare head could suggest boldness, rebellion, or even availability. And that last part, it matters a lot. The unspoken logic. Respectable women shield themselves, their skin with gloves, their eyes with lowered lashes, their thoughts with silence, and their heads with hats. You remember the time your younger cousin Martha dashed out to post a letter, bonnet forgotten in haste. A harmless errand, she thought, but she came back red-faced. A man had tipped his hat at her, stranger, older, too familiar, and asked if she needed company on her walk. The implication was clear. No hat, no escort, no protection, fair game. She cried in her room for an hour, mortified. You check the pins on your own hat now, fastening it with care. Because the rule isn't just social, it's defensive. The Victorian world assumed that a woman without her trappings was a woman without her boundaries. And nothing marked those boundaries quite like a proper hat. Your hat, though decorative, is practically armor. Feathers, velvet, or straw. It doesn't matter. What matters is that it's there, perched on your head, like a polite warning sign. This woman belongs somewhere. She's protected. She's proper. You've learned over time that the hat does more than block sun. It shields reputation. Without it, you're not simply exposed to weather. You're exposed to interpretation. In Victorian cities, there were women who walked bareheaded, but they were performers, servants, or street sellers. Their uncovered heads marked them as common. If you dared to join their ranks, even accidentally, you risked losing status in the blink of an eye. There's even a popular ladies' column from 1879 that reminds readers with cool finality. A lady never allows her head to go uncovered unless ill in bed or under the blessed veil of prayer. How poetic and how suffocating. You recall a fringe story told among the maids about a wealthy merchant's daughter who rebelled one spring, determined to walk hatless in protest. My head is not shameful, she declared. She made it down 2 city blocks before someone mistook her for a theater girl and propositioned her. She was escorted home by a constable, for her own protection, of course. By evening, her father had ordered 12 new bonnets. The next day, she wore 2 just in case. You look at yourself in the mirror now, hat pinned, posture straight, face unreadable. You smile faintly because you know the truth. It was never just a hat. It was a contract between you and the world, between propriety and peril. And as you step outside, hat secure, gait measured, gloves tight, you join a million other women marching through history. Not with swords or banners, but with petticoats and parasols. Silently, elegantly, surviving absurdity with grace. You've made it. The hat is on. The stockings are safe. And your ankles, thank heavens, are still decently hidden beneath layers of crinoline. You can exhale now, because you've survived a day in Victorian womanhood. A day where the tiniest gesture, a smile, a tilt of the head, the color of a ribbon, was enough to draw whispers, raise eyebrows, or unravel your good name. And yet, through all the absurdity, you kept your posture straight, your gaze lowered, and your hat securely pinned. That's no small feat, it's strange, isn't it? How a society so obsessed with manners could craft rules so thoroughly maddening. But there's something quietly powerful about making it through it all, holding your ground in a world that expected you to shrink. You did what millions of women did before you. You smiled when expected, silenced your wit, walked slowly, nodded never, and never once let them see you trip over your hem. But now you're in your own bed. No corsets, no gloves, no unspoken rules breathing down your neck. Just you, the hush of night, the soft thrum of a fan, maybe, and the warm, cozy knowledge that you made it through the day with every absurd rule still spinning behind you. Close your eyes. Let the rustling skirts fade. Let the velvet gloves slip from your fingers. Let the etiquette books crumble into dust. Tonight you get a rest. And in the morning, no one could stop you from running barefoot through the garden.